Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa. I'm Clarisse Fortuné, and here are the top stories from across the continent. 10 years after the November 13 Paris attacks, France remembers. But as Europe has tightened its defenses, the epicenter of jihadist violence has moved south to Africa. From the Sahel to Somalia, extremist groups are expanding, feeding off instability. In Tunisia, hundreds were back in the streets of Gabès, demanding the shutdown of a phosphate plant they blame for toxic emissions and rising health problems. The hearing into a complaint filed last month has been postponed. Fish stocks are collapsing under the double pressure of rising temperatures and overfishing. South Africa introduced new quotas, permits, and protected zones to help the seas recover. But small-scale fishermen say the rules are pushing them to the brink. It's been 10 years since the coordinated attacks that shook Paris on November 13, 2015, a night that left many people dead and changed France forever. As the country holds memorials to honor the victims, experts warn that while France may have contained the terrorist threats at home, the battleground has shifted. Across Africa, particularly in the Sahel, jihadist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are gaining ground. To discuss this, we're joined by Fola Aina, a lecturer at SOAS University and an international security analyst. Dr. Aina, welcome. Firstly, how do you assess how the global terrorist threat has evolved since the 2015 Paris attacks?
Thank you very much for having me. Essentially, the global terrorist threat has evolved over the years. We're beginning to see it take on a more hybrid form, which has also included the use of sophisticated technologies by terrorist organizations. These include commercial drones that have become weaponized and have now been used to attack civilian populations as well as military formations. We've also seen the increased use of other forms of technology, such as cryptocurrency, as part of efforts to diversify sources of income or revenue by some of these terrorist organizations, including the use of artificial intelligence, in some instances also by some of these terrorist organizations. So we've seen a more advanced approach to some of the operations and tactics adopted, by terrorist organizations over the years.
Now, the threat has now focused on the Sahel that has become the new epicenter of jihadist violence. So what do you think is behind this geographic shift?
Well, unfortunately, the Sahel region, the troubled region, has become the global epicenter of terrorism, essentially because some of the underlying root causes of terrorism in the region remain to be unaddressed. Some of these include issues bordering around high poverty rates, high illiteracy rates, high unemployment rates, and worsening inequalities, in addition to poor governance, weak institutions, and also persistent issues bordering around marginalization. So again, the region, unfortunately, has remained, a sort of a safe haven, for terrorist activities to thrive, which obviously terrorist groups across the region are now beginning to exploit and take leverage of.
And we're talking about the Sahel region, but there's also a spillover effect on other countries.
Yes, absolutely. So while there has been a focus on the Sahel region in recent times, essentially because it's been the epicenter of global terrorism, not very much attention has been shed on the potential effects this is having on neighboring countries, particularly within coastal West Africa, which are beginning to suffer the brunt of the spillover effects of the terrorism in the Sahel region. So, for instance, you have countries like Togo, Benin Republic, Cote d'Ivoire, and interestingly, also Ghana, which are countries that a couple of years ago one would have imagined would have been struggling with issues around terrorism, but now, unfortunately, they're having to, confront the realities of the situation on the ground, which includes these spillover effects from the Sahel region.
So, Dr. Aina, we are now seeing Russia filling the security vacuum that was left by France in places like, for example, Mali. So what do you think, what impact has that had on the fight against terrorism?
Well, unfortunately, since the exit of France from the region and with Russia now struggling to fill the security void that has been created, they are beginning to make a huge mistake already, which again has to do with the fact that there's a heavy emphasis on a militarized approach, to addressing insecurity in the region. Now, with this particular approach, it has had the unintended consequence of contributing towards the protractedness of the conflict, which has only seen the terrorist organizations continue to evolve and adapt. And on the other hand, also because of the fact that Russia is having to increasingly rely on mercenaries, including from the Wagner Group and now the Africa Corps, we've seen increased human rights violations, which has in many ways pitched the states against society. So again, the terrorist organizations are simply leveraging on some of these local grievances that are becoming deepened as a result of Russia's continued effort to try to, fill this void that has been created since France's exit.
And among the other players, can we include the United States?
Absolutely. The U.S. continues to play a very significant role, but more so given the West's declining influence in the region, particularly since France exits, we've now seen the U.S. pivot strategically to these coastal West African states, which are now experiencing the spillover effects from the Sahel region, particularly with countries like countries like Togo, Benin Republic, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana. The U.S. is beginning to strengthen its relationship with these countries to prevent the jihadists expanding the corridor across coastal West African states.
Dr. Aina, beyond the military response, what do you think, what other tools are essential to counter extremism on the continent?
I think it's important, beyond the use of military approaches, which unfortunately haven't yielded as much results as one would have expected for some of the reasons I've already earlier outlined. I think a better approach would be one that combines, in addition to these military approaches, efforts intended at addressing the underlying root causes, of these insurgencies or terrorism we're seeing in the region, particularly issues bordering around the need to address endemic poverty, inequalities, unemployment, and also mass illiteracy, in addition to also improving governance, strengthening the rule of law, addressing issues bordering around poor governance, and also strengthening institutions, in addition to also addressing the issues around environmental degradation, which in many ways has contributed towards resource scarcity, thereby in many ways also giving fuel to some of the conflicts we're seeing on the ground across the region.
Dr. Folo Aina, thank you very much for your analysis. Very interesting. Dr. Folo Aina, a lecturer at SOAS University and an international security analyst. Now, hundreds of residents gathered in the southern Tunisian city of Gabès, protesting outside a court as it reviewed a case to suspend a nearby phosphate factory accused of polluting the area. Demonstrators say toxic emissions from the plant have induced a spike in gas poisonings and other health problems. The protests are the latest in weeks of rallies calling for authorities to take stronger action against industrial pollution in the region. Emily Boyle.
Protesters gathered in their hundreds outside this courtroom in southern Tunisia. It is just the latest of a series of demonstrations calling for the closure of a chemical factory blamed for hundreds of cases of poisoning. After filing a legal complaint, these protesters say that justice cannot wait any longer.
Today we submitted evidence from reports of the chemical complex acknowledging the crime committed against the region. We have challenged an extended postponement as such a delay poses a danger to our lives and those of our children.
The region has been rocked by unrest for more than a month. Early September, more than 300 people were hospitalized in what has been described as a mass asphyxiation event.
We, as civil society, are here to support the case brought against the chemical factory in Gabès. God willing, the court will do us justice and put an end to an environmental crime that has been going on in Gabès for more than 50 years.
The Gabès chemical plant opened in 1972. Run by the Tunisian chemical group, it processes phosphate to make fertilizers. The waste produced by the chemical plant contaminates the water and the air around it. This toxic discharge has been found to cause cancer and serious respiratory diseases. Despite a 2017 promise to close the plant down, the number of severe illnesses in the region continues to increase, and almost 90% of the local biodiversity has already been lost.
And in other news, Kenya says over 200 of its citizens are fighting for Russia in Moscow's war in Ukraine. Among them are former members of Kenya's security forces. And according to Kenya's Foreign Affairs Ministry, some of those who have been rescued said they were forced to assemble drones and handle chemicals without proper training or protective gear. More than 1,400 citizens from 3 African countries are said to be fighting alongside Russian forces in Ukraine. Where will the 2036 or 2040 Olympic Games take place? South Africa could be a possibility. The South African government is planning to bid, aiming to bring one of the world's biggest sporting events to Africa for the first time. The country was the first on the continent to host the Football World Cup in 2010. And finally, the mini-qualifying tournament for the 2026 World Cup in Morocco. In the first semi-final, Nigeria defeated Gabon 4-1 after extra time. The Super Eagles can thank their star striker, Victor Osimhen, who scored twice. The African final will take place this Sunday. As global temperatures rise, the world's oceans, which absorb about 90% of the excess heat from climate change, are reaching their limits. Fish stocks continue to plummet from both rising temperatures and overfishing. In South Africa, the government has imposed quotas, permits, and new marine protected areas to help fish populations recover. But local fishermen, though they say the measures have made their job impossible. Brian Quinn reports.
On South Africa's False Bay, local fishermen return to shore in their small wooden boats. As recently as 2 years ago, their nets would be full. Now their catch has fallen by 80%.
Climate change is affecting our fish here. In the years back, you can come and you can throw the net full of fish. Now it's bad.
Marine surface temperatures along the South African coastline have risen by up to 2 degrees Celsius, disrupting migration and spawning cycles of local fish species and sending them into deeper waters further from shore. To help depleted populations recover, the government has put restrictions on fishing activity, requiring permits, instituting quotas, and designating marine protected areas. Fishermen in nearby Kalk Bay say those rules are killing their livelihoods.
When the munch is good for the crayfish, the quality is good where you can make some money, they don't allow you to catch crayfish in that munch.
Scientists, though, insist the measures are necessary and will ultimately benefit small-scale fishing.
We're living in changing times and we all must adapt and we all must change to allow recovery and recuperation of our oceans. And if fishermen understand the science and the reason why the science is there for the marine protected areas, and we just move around these MPAs to allow recovery, I think everyone can win.
At the UN COP30 climate conference underway in Brazil, South Africa is among the nations calling for more climate finance, including a global support framework for vulnerable communities like nearshore fishermen.
And this concludes today's edition of our Eye in Africa. Thank you for watching.